Okay, so when we look at the theory of evolution, grade 12s, we know that things we see today arose from things that existed in the past. That's simple. You come from your grandparents or your great-grandparents existed in the past, and then they had your grandparents, and then they produced parents, and then they produced you. Okay? So things that existed in the past arose, or things that exist today arose from the past. We come from a history. Although we come from the same, we might look different because things change over long periods of time. And so, although everything that comes is in existence from today arose from things that exist in the past, we don't necessarily look the same. This is because evolution has caused change. And that evolution comes or gets driven through the process of variation. So we have variation taking place, we're different, we change over time, we become unique, we become adapted to suit our particular environment, and evolution basically takes place. Change over time is a very, very common thing. It's nothing difficult or nothing contrary to anything in terms of change over time. Okay? We all have changed. Yes? Okay, we should have evolution throughout our lives as well, and we should have evolution within our species. Evolution takes place. Okay? So change over a long period of time. This principle applies to everything in the universe, not just the Earth. Evolution is essentially, essentially described as change over time. This brings about diversity of life. There are three major observations made when studying the natural environment. Firstly, we have a rich biodiversity of living organisms. And so because there's great biodiversity within living organisms, as well as variation between organisms, we have this driving force. Okay? There's competition that exists, and there's the ability for organisms to change and adapt to suit their environment. If you can't, you become extinct. How living organisms are well adapted to a particular environment. Okay, so you put a camel in a different environment, it can't live there. It's adapted to live in a desert. It has specific features that allows it to be successful in that particular environment. Take a camel, put it somewhere else, it's not going to be able to survive. Okay, so we are adapted for our specific location, for our specific area. This is referred to as biogeography, looking at how the geography has influenced evolution. Okay, we'll talk about that later. And then changes that continue to take place in the environment. So there are changes. We know the environment is not stationary, not stagnant. Okay, the environment changes, and those environmental changes cause the animal or the organism to be able to either adapt or become extinct. All right. So there are a range of species occupying a habitat or ecosystem in a region. Scientists have studied 1.5 million different extant. Extant is living. Extinct is gone. Extinct, everyone understands extinct. Extant is living species. This is only those that have been studied and described. There are many species that have become extinct, which has reduced the diversity on Earth. Scientists use evolution to prove a possible explanation for the existence of this large or very large range of organisms. Evolution is a process whereby the present-day organisms are derived from pre-existent different species that developed into their current form through a process of gradual change over millions of years. So there's been gradual change that has existed that leads us to where we have all the various species that we have now. Closely related species share more common characteristics or traits than distantly related species. So the closer you are related, the closer that your features are going to overlap. The further the distance, so we don't share many features with plants, because at some point, bacterium evolved into protists. Protists then diverged into a fungi-like one, a plant-like one, and an animal-like one. Animal diversity took place. Porifera, Platyhelminth, all those ones we studied in grade 11. And plant diversity took place. Bryophytes, pteridophytes, angiosperms, and gymnosperms. Or gymnosperms and angiosperms. So we are further away from plants, according to evolutionists, than what we are to an animal that shares a common ancestor with us. Okay? So this is the question, Tatum, is that humans did not evolve from monkeys or from apes, the great apes. We share a common ancestor. Okay? And that common ancestor then diverged and became the two. So we didn't come from that line, we come from a different line. Okay? We will talk about human evolution when we get there. Okay, so that's the next topic, which we'll do next term. Okay. Right, so biological evidence can be described as the change in genetic composition of living organisms from one generation to the next. In other words, change that living organisms have undergone over a long period of time. All present-day life forms have descended from and related to those that lived in the past. All present-day life forms look different from those that are in the past because they are become modified from one generation to the next. This is referred to as descent with modification. Please make sure that you have that sentence. Descent with modification. Somewhere in your textbook, just have a look for that sentence. What does that mean? Is that you have descended from your previous generations or from the previous species that existed, but you have become modified, in other words, specialized, changed, different to suit your specific environmental pressures. Okay, descent with modification. Michelle, what page is it on in your textbook? Page what? 244. 2.4. Page 2.4. For those of you that are at home. Okay, last point before we get into contributing fields of study that add is this concept of macro and micro evolution. Okay, so we can separate evolution into two categories or two classes. We're going to talk about this. It becomes a very, very prominent way of testing. I'll show you how they test this in this particular instance. So it'll come up later, okay? But this is just foundation. We'll talk about how they question this in a particular exam, okay, or in the finals. Okay, so we have macroevolution. What is macroevolution? Macroevolution is the development of new life forms from earlier life forms over many generations and leads to speciation, a new species. Okay? So in other words, one species evolves and changes because of environmental pressure to another species. Then we have microevolution, which is variation within a species. Microevolution is change that exists in the original species and they are still the same species. This is what we see in diversity of humans, skin color and eye shape and all of this stuff. We're still the same species. Although we have variation, there is microevolution taking place within our species, but we still are the same species. Okay? So microevolution, this I'm 100% in agreement with. We definitely have microevolution. Where I'm a bit, from my personal perspective, is the speciation concept, but I don't want to get too much into it. Right. So the variation that occurs within a species, small changes originate in the gene pool, resulting in small changes in the genotype of the species. These changes are passed on to the offspring, and that microevolution can shift. And that's where the question and kind of concept will come up. I'll speak about this when we talk about the peppered moth. Okay? So just like put a little memory bank in your head, peppered moth. Right. I don't know how much time we have. Are you guys all alive still? We end at 9:06. So we've got about 6 minutes. Okay, so let's see what we can do. Let's see if we can do the first one. There are 5 scientific fields of study that provide evidence for evolution and show that species are related or have a common ancestor. I have seen this question come up in an essay, as an essay question, okay? Explain the 5, or explain 2 of the 5, or 3 of the 5 fields of study that contribute to the theory of evolution, and explain how they enforce, or not enforce, or, what's the word? Give evidence, there we go. Give evidence for evolution. Okay, then you would have to take one of these and then explain it, how it contributes to evolution. Does that make sense? Okay, are you 3 beautiful, wonderful people? Good. Right, so there are 5 scientific fields of study that provide evidence for evolution and show that species are related or have a common ancestor. Paleontology. What is paleontology again? There we go, fossils, the study of fossils. Okay, so we study fossils and we're going to see how the relationship of fossils actually establishes that evolution is the driving force behind the diversity that we have today. Okay, so the fossil record, etc. Then we have comparative anatomy. Let's just break that word down. What does it mean to have comparison, or what are we doing? What is this word, this first part? We are comparing the anatomy of various animals. Okay? And so when we compare the anatomy of, let's say, a human to a fish, okay, you might not think that there's commonality there, but actually there is some commonality there, and that's evidence to show that we came from a common ancestor. Okay, then we have biogeography. Bio means not nature. Bio means life. Biodiversity, life diversity. Biology, the study of life. Biogeography, so bio means life. Okay, so this is life. What is geography? Okay? Position, yeah, let's go with something a little bit more. It's the study of the earth, right? It's the study of the earth and the continents and the location of the distribution of various things along the earth, etc. So this is life on earth, right? So this comparative anatomy, we're comparing the anatomical structure of animals. So fossils, we're happy with that one, we're happy with. This is looking at life on earth, the distribution of life on earth. Are they related? How are they related, etc. Then we have molecular biology and genetics. We have a fairly good understanding of genetics, and so we're looking at what are some of the common things that we share in terms of genetic makeup with various species and organisms that gives evidence for evolution. And then we have comparative embryology. Once again, we are comparing the embryos of organisms, and we are seeing that there is some kind of evolutionary link. And so all of these 5 fields of study contribute to the idea that we come from a common ancestor, but we have changed over time. Species change through the forces of natural selection, acting on the great genetic variation within a species. So today, we have looked at where variation comes from. We have briefly spoken about natural selection. We've given an understanding of what a species and a population is, and we've said that that variation drives the species to be able to adapt to its environmental pressure. There is first a pressure that is exerted on the species that will stimulate evolutionary change. Okay? You either have it or you don't have it. It happens randomly. This word random, very, very, very important. When you talk about evolution, no one can control how evolution happens. It happens randomly. Okay, so grade 12, to be honest, I think tomorrow it would be better if we just start paleontology. It's a good place to kind of end today. So tomorrow we're going to start looking at paleontology, and then we'll look at all of the different fields of study. I'm going to try and do 2 per lesson to see that we can just get through it quite quickly. Are there any questions, grade 12s? Cool, let's call it a day.